Welcome to Let's Talk Salud, Dinero y Amor. Let's Talk Salud, Dinero y Amor. We have another very important topic today, and I'm going to have to tell you that I have been looking forward to addressing the topic, today's topic, for a long time. And I am so glad that I was able to find folks who can help us to develop this topic, and it is elections, popular vote versus electoral vote. I know we hear this every 4 years. People complain. Some people like the popular vote thing better than the electoral vote. I have never heard anybody who said that they prefer the electoral system. It's almost like it's the other way around. Who knows? Maybe we need to understand it a little better. But anyway, I am very happy to address this matter of elections, popular vote versus electoral vote. And I have two guests today with me that I would like to now introduce. And Gina Roberts. Gina Roberts have been with us before, and Gina is with the Arizona Clean Elections. And I'm going to show that contact information for Gina. So Gina, thank you very much for joining our show once again. It's always good. Let me tell you, my boss is really happy that we are collaborating with you and with Arizona Clean Elections. Welcome once again, and thank you.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me. And, we're very happy to partner with you as well. And all of your customers who are tuning into this, we want them to be informed voters. So we appreciate the invitation to be here with you.
I have to believe that, and actually I know for a fact, because the moment I mentioned the Electoral College, you were very eager to address this matter. So I'm sure this is something that you do present often, and it's a topic that you enjoy talking about.
I find it very interesting. And I think it's so interesting because I often hear from voters about what is it? There's just so much to talk about when we get into the Electoral College, between the history and how it works today and how America really does choose its president. So it's a great and timely discussion.
And the interesting thing is that only the president is selected in this kind of a way. Every other election is the popular vote, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's really just our president and vice president that the Electoral College is meant to work for. And so, yes, all other elections, it's done through the popular vote.
Thank you once again. And I have also, I want to introduce my friend and my colleague, Brendan Blake. Brendan Blake, and I'll show you also your contact information. Thank you, Brendan. I know this is, I think it was a few months ago, actually before the COVID-19 hit, that you and I were talking about this topic, and we wanted to address it. I don't believe that we did, but anyway, I'm so happy and thankful that you can join us also, Brendan. Welcome and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. We actually did talk about this at my desk. You kind of came up to my desk one day and said, "Hey, how would you feel about talking about the Electoral College on the show?" And I said, "Let's do it." And I think that was back in January that conversation took place. So here we are 8 months later. So it's good to be
right.
here.
Well, Gina, help us understand, is this something new? Is this something that that has been in the Constitution forever? Has there been any changes along the way? What's up with this Electoral College, if you don't mind?
Sure. So the Electoral College, it goes all the way back to our founding fathers and their discussion in drafting the Constitution. And really, it ended up being a compromise, if you will. There was a lot of debate between the founding fathers about how America would elect its president. And there were some who felt that the president should be elected actually by Congress directly. And then there were others who felt that it should be done by a popular vote of the qualified citizens of the country. And so the resulting compromise of that was the Electoral College. So it's actually been around since the framing of the Constitution. It's just, maybe sometimes it's out of sight, out of mind, because our elections for president happen every 4 years. So about every 4 years, and the discussion starts to come up again about, what is the Electoral College and how does that work? But yes, it's been around since the beginning.
Good. Now, I did a little bit of homework, and I learned that in the 1900s, no person that won the electoral vote didn't win also the popular vote. This happened in the 1800s, and then in the 2000s, right? In the 21st century, we had two elections where one candidate won the electoral vote but lost the popular vote, or vice versa. So it's interesting. Nothing in the 1900s. Yes, in the 1800s, and now in the 2000s or 21st century, we have had actually the 2000 election, and then the last one. What was the last one? Hillary Clinton's, I think, with yes. So
Yes.
we had at least on our times that we remember two elections where one candidate won the popular vote and the other one won the electoral. So you can win the popular by by a landslide, if you will, but unless you reach you win the minimum required to win the electoral, you will not win the elections. Is this correct?
That's correct. And what's interesting about that is the variables that are in play there. When we talk about the Electoral College and how many electoral votes a person needs, how that's allocated across the state is based really on population. And so as states and their population change, whether it's between people moving or the increases in population, that can have an impact. And then also, of course, voter turnout. So most of our states are winner take all, and so voter turnout can have a big impact between whether or not a person wins the popular vote or they actually win the actual election by getting the electoral votes needed. So it's you're right. That's our history, and I think our most what people are most familiar with is the 2000 election, where we saw the candidate win the popular vote, but not the actual presidency. That was in Bush v. Gore. So it's just interesting how all of these different factors can impact that between, again, the allocation of the electoral votes based off of population, and then of course voter turnout too.
Yeah, one of the things that I had issues with is the word college. I just cannot seem to get a hold of that word college, electoral college. And I looked it up and I found some synonyms, even in information about this matter. And it can also be like a council, electoral council, or even a coalition. So basically, let's kind of get into this matters of the Electoral College. I'm showing this map on the screen, as I'm sure you're seeing. Let me leave it open for the two of you and kind of tell me what you see on this map, and explain when you pinpoint at one of the items, and just hit one and then let the other one go, and then the other one. So, and then I'll kind of interject some things here and there. But what do you see in this map? Let's start with you, Brandon.
Okay. I see, I think it's obvious that we see a lot of numbers, but the thing that I see at the top there is 538 and the 270 to win. And, there's plenty of polling and data out there to talk about, who has a chance to win the election. And it's all very exciting when we look at, this is a map of the United States and where there is opportunity. Obviously, there are certainly parts along this map that are strongly held by one party or another. And there's always a fight for those states that are in the middle. And that, to me, and you can't just win the states that strongly support your particular party. In order for you to reach that 270 in the middle, you have to reach out to some other states as well.
Okay, Gina, what else do you see on that map?
So my eyes go directly to Arizona because, of course, we focus on voter education for Arizona voters. But when we look at this map, what we're seeing here is the allocation of the electoral votes that make up the 538 of the Electoral College. So Arizona, you'll see, has an 11 next to it. That means Arizona has 11 electoral votes. Now, every state is allocated 2 electoral votes for our representation in the United States Senate. We all have 2 U.S. senators. And then the remaining electoral votes that you see that make up our total number of 11, that's due to our congressional delegation. So in Arizona, we have 9 congressional districts, which means we have 9 Congress members. And so the 9 plus the 2 give you the 11 electoral votes that Arizona has. And so you'll see that in comparison to the other states where, for example, California, who has a higher population than we do, they have 55 electoral votes. And so it's really interesting with this timing right now because we are also going through a census. And so it's the census numbers that actually determine the population of our states and whether or not states will either pick up or lose a congressional district. And so participating in the census is so important because here's just one other factor that the census can have an impact on, and that is, of course, our electoral votes and our congressional, the number of congressional districts that we have. So again, those electoral votes are allocated to the states based off of population. And again, Arizona, we have 11.
So are you saying that this numbers stay with us for 10 years and potentially we will have new numbers of delegates or electoral votes, if you will, come, after the census is done? So this is a 10-year thing, right? That it stays and then it may change.
That's correct, David. So we're always going to have the 538. It's just how is that number divvied up among the states? So Arizona is, people were expecting Arizona to actually gain a congressional seat. And so with that, our electoral votes would go up. But then that means another state would have to lose that. So again, it's all based on population. And again, if you have not participated in the census right now, I highly encourage you to do so because it impacts so much. The data from the census that is used impacts a lot when it comes to elections. And here's an example of how it impacts the Electoral College.
Now, let me throw another question here in the mix. So we're talking about electoral votes, and they're called electors, right? Electors. So these are actual people, correct?
Correct.
And so does each party select its own electors?
Yes, that is correct. So the way it works is we have our official presidential nominee, the candidate for the parties. So for example, in Arizona, we have the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So the nominees have already been determined based off of our previous presidential preference election and the national conventions. And so where we're at right now is what happens is the official candidate the official candidate for each party, they have to file their nomination paperwork with the Secretary of State's office. And what they're doing is they're filing a nomination paper for themselves, their running mate, so the vice president, and then their 11 electors. Those electors are chosen by the state political party. And so really you're seeing 13 pieces of paper turned into the Secretary of State's office, and you'll see 13 names on your ballot. So when a voter gets their November 3rd general election ballot, they're going to see the candidate name for president, the candidate name for vice president, and all of the names for the 11 electors. And they're really voting for the 11 electors who've been chosen by the state party to represent that presidential nominee and vote for them at the Electoral College.
So each of the two parties does this, correct? Because they don't know who's going to win. They have to be ready with their electors in case they win, and then eventually those electors will cast their votes, right? Eventually.
Right. So every candidate, every official presidential candidate who has their name on the ballot will have their 11 electors on the ballot printed next to their name too. So every candidate has their electors.
So Brandon, here's a question for you.
Sure.
So is the popular vote then thrown out the window, out the door, or it still serves a purpose, right? In the selecting or in the election of the electors.
Sure.
I assume. Okay, can you explain that? Because when we talk about the Electoral College, it doesn't mean that the popular vote doesn't count, but it counts towards something different than the other elections. Can you explain?
Sure. So in a state like Arizona, who, as Gina mentioned, is a winner-take-all state, that means that the popular vote in just the state of Arizona determines who that state will choose, whether it's the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate. So if the Republican wins Arizona like they did last time, then the state of Arizona will have its Republican electors vote for the Republican candidate. Now, there are a couple of states, and Gina, correct me if and when I'm wrong, that Maine and Nebraska have a separate system where they are not winner take all. They have a popular vote section of their election where the popular vote determines which elector goes to which party. And then they also have separate elections within their particular congressional districts that also determine who wins those electoral votes. So for instance, I believe in Maine, you have 2 congressional districts. So those congressional districts, if one votes Republican and one votes Democrat, and then the state votes Republican, that means that Maine will split its votes up 3-1. Did I get that right, Gina?
Yes, that is correct. Maine and Nebraska are the exception, where all other states are winner take all, and their system is commonly referred to as the congressional method. So I think you did a good job of explaining that.
How about DC? Does DC matter in the election here?
They do. DC does matter. DC, they actually are allocated 3 electoral votes.
Okay.
And so that was, I believe that was an amendment to the Constitution where it stated that DC is allocated the same amount of electoral votes as the state that has the lowest amount. So we do see that DC has 3.
Let me give a scenario here. So let's say that one of the parties let's say that 4 million people vote in Arizona, and one party gets 2.8 million votes, and the other one gets 1.8, and the other one 2.2. Would that make the 4? I think I got my math right.
Yes.
So whoever gets 2.2 doesn't get 2.2 votes. They would get 13 electoral votes, right?
11. They're going to take all 11 electoral votes.
Sorry, I meant to say 11. Sorry. Okay. So someone, I mean, even if one gets, defeats the other party by 1 million or 2 million votes, in the end, the winner will take 11 electoral votes, and that applies to every single state, with the exception of the ones that you just mentioned, that has different rules. Correct?
That is correct.
Perfect. Let's go to another point that I think is very important, and that is, we hear a lot about blue states, red states, and then swing states, which I believe they're also called battleground states. And I have to believe that this determines, or at least one. Well, let me give you the floor to someone who wants to explain what is that: the blue states, the red states, and the swing states first.
I guess I'll go ahead and go.
Go for it.
Earlier that there are certainly what are considered to be strongholds for political parties. For instance, California has voted for Democrats in I couldn't even tell you how far back they have voted Democrat on the presidential ticket. And a state like Texas is what is considered a Republican stronghold that typically tends to lean very strongly to the Republican side of the dichotomy. So when we talk about states that are swing states, we talk about states that are somewhere in the middle. They classically considered swing states are swing states like Ohio is considered a swing state. Florida has long been considered a swing state, and our very own state of Arizona over the past decade has really become much more of a swing state as we enter a new election. And I think that certainly has been borne out in the last few election results.
So if people run campaigns, I assume they're going to invest more money on those states that they feel are battleground states, right? Because they feel that they have this other states in their pocket, so to speak. So they'll campaign perhaps less and devote more time and energy and money on those states that can lean in either direction. Is that pretty much how their thinking is?
Yes,
Gina?
and you. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gina.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think all eyes are going to be on Arizona for this election. When you look at what our voter registration numbers are, we've got just under 4 million registered voters in the state of Arizona, and a good chunk of that are our independent voters. And so while Republican voters do have the highest voter registration numbers, and the number of voters that we have that are unaffiliated are very, very close to the number of Democratic voters that we have. So when we talk about looking at Arizona as a swing state, you know, it really does play into, well, what would the independent vote look like? And so I think definitely we will see a lot of campaigning here in Arizona, and voters, you know, can expect to get those mailers and see those TV commercials and ads. And so again, I think just looking at the makeup of our voter registration is definitely one of the contributing factors to Arizona potentially being a swing state.
Let me address another concept that I skipped my mind earlier. Are electors consider delegates?
No. So that's a great question, and we often see those words interchanged. So when we talk about a delegate, a delegate is used when we talk about the national conventions. And so the way that can I go into the process, David? Is now a good time to sort of talk about the chronology?
Yes,
okay.
Of course.
Great. So in Arizona, in March of this year, we had our presidential preference election. And that presidential preference election was an opportunity for, and only the Democratic Party participated in it. And that was an opportunity for Democratic voters to tell their party who their preferred candidate was. Since the Republican Party already had an incumbent in office, they did not participate in the PPE. And so what happens was this summer, the political parties had their national conventions. And at the national conventions, that's where you see delegates. They go to the national conventions, and the delegates cast their vote at those conventions for who they want the official party nominee to be. So that's what a delegate is. Once the conventions are over and the parties have officially nominated their candidate, that candidate then gets placed on the general election ballot along with their electors. So what happens is when voters go to vote their ballot, they're going to see those 11 electors' names, the president and the vice president. And then whoever wins the popular vote, so the highest vote getter in Arizona, that candidate and their electors, what happens next is in December, we have what's called a meeting of the electors. So those 11 electors will come and they'll cast their vote for the candidate that they were pledged to. And then from there, what happens is all of the states, they transmit their electoral votes up to Congress. And in January, on January 6th, actually, there's a joint meeting of Congress, and that's where they tally up all of the votes and they declare who the president is. And then we have the swearing in for the president on January 20th.
Okay, in some election back, I don't remember which one it was, there was this matter of the super delegates. What is that super delegates concept?
So that's something that we routinely hear in conjunction with the Democratic Party. So going back to the national conventions, when a delegate goes to, and so let's talk about Arizona specifically. So when the national convention occurs and the Democratic Party held their convention and the delegates went to the convention, the delegates are committed to voting for the highest vote getter in the presidential preference election. And if no candidate gets the most votes during that round of voting at the convention, then at that point, that delegate is, if they're free to vote for whoever they want to, if you will. Now, so a super delegate is somebody in the political party who goes to the convention, but they are not committed to any candidate. The superdelegate is able to vote for whoever they want. So it's really a term that you mostly hear associated with the Democratic Party, but basically it just means a delegate is somebody who is committed to voting for a particular candidate, and the superdelegate is not committed and can vote for whoever they want. And again, all of that is done for the purpose of finalizing who the official candidate will be to represent the party on the November 3rd ticket.
Okay, let me throw in another kind of, I guess, I don't know how you would take it, but if going back to the blue, red states, independent states, could that give itself or lend itself to a current president? And I don't mean this current president, but any current president, to start treating or doing some actions in the states like to win kind of to win the favor of those voters there by doing a little bit more in some states than others?
You know, what I would add to that, David, is what I'm hearing sounds very similar to on that question. I think that lends to sometimes the arguments against having the electoral college, actually, because it comes down to the premise of one person, one vote. And so maybe not so much a swing state, but more of how many electoral votes does this particular state have? And, you know, if I'm in a state that has less electoral votes, you know, do I really does my vote have as much weight as another voter in a different state that has a higher number of electoral votes? Those are some of the arguments that we hear when discussing the Electoral College. So that's all I would add to that.
Well, and
Perfect.
Gene, to your point, I would say that, you know, maybe there is somebody who is of one party that lives in a state that is controlled by another party, and they may not feel as though their vote counts in a sense because they know that, say, a Republican lives in California. They know that their vote for president isn't going to go to a Republican president, just as in a person who is a Democrat in Texas knows that most likely their vote's not going to go to the president that they voted for or the person that they voted for president. So that kind of goes to your point.
Got it. Let's conclude the section of the Electoral College. I think we've touched a good amount of items. Hopefully, by just this 27-minute conversation, people will get an idea, a better idea, hopefully. And so, unless there's any other final thoughts on this particular matter, we can move on. And I'll ask Gina just to kind of close the program or are moving towards the close of the program by sharing some important information about the general election. I'll show you some of the slides that you and I agreed that I can show, and perhaps you can kind of go over them briefly.
Sure. So on November 3rd, we have our general election, and happens to be a presidential election year. And basically what the general election serves is to actually elect the candidates into the office. We just had our primary on August 4th, but the purpose of the primary was to narrow down the nominees. So now all of those nominees, they've advanced to the general election, and here's where we actually elect our candidates into office. So this year, again, it's a presidential election year, so we will see those electors' names on the ballot. And since we often get questions from voters on, well, what is a midterm election? And a midterm election is an election that is a non-presidential election year. So this year it is a presidential election year, and we typically see higher turnout in our presidential election years. So hopefully our voters get out and vote. And again, that's going to be on November 3rd. And again, one of the reasons for the higher turnout is, there's a lot of media coverage on this election, and we've heard from voters who actually like to call it the Super Bowl of elections. This is the main event.
Right.
And it is. Voting for president is very important, but I would remind voters there are a lot of other elections on that same ballot. Please vote down your ballot. Plenty of important decisions will be made on your local elections too. And so who can participate? Every registered voter can participate. So it doesn't matter what party you're in, if you're unaffiliated, as long as you're registered by the deadline, you can vote in the November 3rd election. And then so for what's on the ballot, at the federal level, we do have our presidential electors, and there is a U.S. Senate seat on the ballot. This is to fill the remainder of Senator McCain's term. And then we do have our 9 congressional districts. And then at the state level, our only statewide office is Corporation Commissioner, and this year it's an elect 3, which means you can vote for up to 3 people. And we have our legislative districts. There's 30 legislative districts in the state of Arizona, and each district has 1 Senate and 2 representatives. So you can vote for your state legislature. And then, of course, we have our judges and justices that are up for retention. And then we have our ballot measures. So we'll have our statewide ballot measures. And then, of course, you'll have your local elections. So the county offices, all of the county offices are up for election this year. So sheriff, treasurer, recorder, you'll see all of those on your ballot. And then any city or town local elections and special districts. So it's going to be quite a full ballot.
Yes, the Super Bowl of elections, right? Let me, before we move to the next slide, on ballot measures, I understand there's going to be one on education. Is any one of you familiar with that one?
David, actually, so the ballot measures, I think and I'm sorry, usually court cases involved anytime that there's a filing for a ballot measure. And so, off the top of my head, I don't remember what the two are. I believe there is one for education. All of the information on it, voters, you're going to actually get it in your mailbox.
Okay.
Secretary of State
Perfect.
will mail you a publicity pamphlet that has all the information you need to know about those statewide ballot measures.
Got it. And this obviously address the, I'm going to leave it there for 2-3 seconds. If you're watching the video, you can stop the video. We're not going to ask Gina to cover this as we already did, but you can feel free to pause the video, take a picture of it or what have you, read those points on the Electoral College 101. There's another slide. And
you know what, David, I'm
yes.
sorry. Can I just add one more point? If you could go, yes, this slide right here. Something we didn't talk about was a faithless elector. What does that mean? And I would like to talk about that because there was actually just a few months ago, the Supreme Court made a ruling on this issue, and that was a very important ruling because the point is when we've talked about the candidate and their 11 electors, in December, those 11 electors are going to meet and they're going to cast their official vote that is tallied by Congress for the candidate that they pledged themselves to.
Okay.
But what happens if one of those electors decides to vote for somebody else, a different candidate that they were not pledged to? That's called a faithless elector. And we saw this happen in the last presidential election out of Colorado, and that's what prompted the Supreme Court case. And the Supreme Court ruled that states could, in fact, penalize those faithless electors. And so I just wanted to state that Arizona does have a law that requires electors, they must be faithful. So they must vote for the candidate that they were committed to.
But did I understand right that there are some states that do not have that law?
There are some states that do not have that law written on the books, but I believe, though, we typically don't see a lot of cases of faithless electors. And so what does that mean for the states that don't have anything on the books? I'm not entirely sure, but for I think there's 38 states that do actually have something in the law that states that those electors must vote for the candidate they're pledged to.
And the other ones must trust that people will be faithful, right, to the will of the voters, if you will.
That's right. I mean, you would assume that an elector would be picked because you know that person is going to vote for that candidate.
And real quick, date. What do we have here?
These are important dates. So the deadline to get registered to vote for the November 3rd general election is October 5th. So we are encouraging voters to do it now. Please don't wait up until the deadline. It takes only a few minutes. So if you still need to get registered, do it now. And if you need to update your registration, if you've moved, if you've changed your name, things like that, go ahead and confirm your registration. That way there's no surprises on election day. And then very importantly, the election actually begins on October 7th because that's when early voting starts in Arizona. So if you're on the permanent early voting list, or if you're scheduled to get a ballot, it's going to go out in the mail to you on Wednesday, October 7th. And so we are encouraging people, when you get your ballot, vote it right away, send it back right away, don't delay. You can mail it back. If you do, we recommend you mail it back at least a week before election day to ensure it gets there in time, or you can drop it off at any voting location or drop box in your county. It's important to remember all ballots must be received by 7 p.m. on election day, and you must sign the envelope too. So very important. And then you can vote early in person too, starting October 7th. And if you want to do that, you have all the way up until Friday, October 30th at 5 p.m. And if you go and vote in person, whether it's early or on election day, don't forget your ID. And then of course we have Tuesday, election day, November 3rd. Polls are open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Perfect. And, on this one, take a look at this list. I would not like to ask you to cover all of the points if one jumps at you that you feel it's important. But if not, I would encourage those watching this video to, again, stop the video, pause it, and kind of take a look at that. This is a voter to-do list. I think it's important. May I move to the next? And we have your website address here, cleanelections.gov. We encourage people to go to your website and find more information. Anything, may I move on, or is there anything that you want to address on this one?
I think you can move on. I think, voters want to spend some time on this. And again, registering to vote and requesting your early ballot, if that's how you want to vote, that's what we encourage you to do now. So I would think those are the most important things right now.
Right. And the important things to remember, again, pause the video, take a look at that if there's any information you need. And to end, I would like to come back to Brandon. I would like to ask you about AARP's work. What is AARP doing on this, and what people can do to get more information about AARP's voter engagement efforts? Just a little something here on this slide, Brandon, if you don't mind.
Sure. So AARP, as in every election, we are involved in, one, getting out the vote, making sure that people are aware that an election is happening, and two, we want to make sure that voters have the education that they need in order to make the decision that is best for them. We don't tell people who to vote. I think David has mentioned here so many times that AARP is a nonpartisan organization. We only care that you know what the people that you're voting for stand for. So where we want to know where they stand on our issues, such as Social Security and Medicare, and including prescription drugs. And also this year, we want to make sure that you can vote safely, whether that is through a mail-in ballot or dropping your ballot off on election day. We want to make sure that you can vote safely. And we have all of that information on the website that David just put up there, which is aarp.org/2020
elections.
2020 elections. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll show it. I'll show it again. I think it's important, just so you can see it. We're about to close the show. I feel very, very good. I think we managed to cover all the points that we wanted to cover. This is a good 40-minute show. I think it's good enough for folks to get a good understanding of what the Electoral College is. We cover very, very good points. So this concludes the show. I want to thank both of you for joining. Gina Roberts with Clean Elections, Brendan Blake with the AARP Arizona, my colleague and friend. Thank you so much. And Gina, be sure that we're going to come back to you and ask you to join us for more shows. We are really impressed at how well you know your stuff and your verse on this. No wonder why AZ Clean Elections hire you. They did a great job, and we really appreciate that you can partner with us, and through this partnership that we can offer information to those that follow us at AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection Facebook page. So Gina Roberts, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Brendan. It was a pleasure. And I think our goals are very similar. We just want to educate voters. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, Brendan Blake, for joining our show. And thank you again.
Of course, thank you. And remember, there are other elections, as Gina mentioned. Down the ballot are just as important at the top of the ticket.
Thank you. This concludes our show. Thank you so very, very much.
Arizona Hispanic Connection.